Okay, so I noticed in the comments some of you have left that you're still having problems connecting to the internet with your server. So in other words, making your server publicly accessible. Instead of sitting here going through all the technical details, I'm going to instead explain how it works. And this is going to better help you troubleshoot and find exactly what's going on. So to start with, let's look at how it all works. The main thing, I'm going to go ahead and right here in the middle, we're going to draw a circle, and this is going to be our router slash modem. Now, really these things are two different things, and a lot of times you'll get like an all-in-one, like a modem slash router combination. Now, as far as this tutorial goes, I'm going to just mainly be referring to the router, although the modem is connected, so like I said, we're just going to say it's all one. And the next thing we're going to have our server. Alright, so this little thing here is going to be our server. So if we're doing our Raspberry Pi server, this would be the Raspberry Pi. And I'm also going to create another computer. We're going to pretend this right here is our laptop. And I am not an artist, by the way, so excuse the poor quality and artwork. And this is our laptop, but it can be any computer. We can have other computers on the network and whatnot. And then the next one, we're going to have our ISP, or the internet, which ISP is our internet service provider, but we're not really going to be focused on this yet. Okay, we're going to set this aside first, and what we're going to focus on right now is our local area network, and that's referred to as the LAN. Now, to understand how the local area network works, we're going to be connected to our router somehow. It's going to be a connection, and the arrows, this is showing how the traffic works. So our server connects to the router, and the router communicates with the server, and they go back and forth. Same thing goes with our laptop. We're going to have a connection, and these connections can either be wired, like Ethernet cable, or it can be a wireless network. Maybe connected via Wi-Fi, it doesn't matter, it works the same. And so whenever you connect your computer to the router, most of your routers, we're not getting into industrial grade routers or anything like a commercial grade. And these are just your common home user sort of routers. But whenever you connect it, usually it's gonna automatically issue you an IP address. So this may be 192.168.1.11. Alright, and this one is probably, I'm just making this stuff up. You'll have to check for your own individual computer and check to see the actual address. .1.1, we'll just do 14, okay? And these are their identities on the network. Alright, so far we're connected, and we can communicate back and forth and whatnot. If I open up my browser, okay, so on the server, we're going to assume that that we have Apache running on it, right? So what Apache does, it's going to configure everything so it answers traffic on port 80. Alright, and it'll also answer traffic by default, usually 443, which is your HTTPS protocol, and that's your secure protocol, SSL. And so what I can do, if I've got Apache running on the server, what I can do with my laptop, I should be able to type in the IP address of this. So I should be able to go TTP:// 192.168.1.11. Whenever I type that in on this computer, my laptop or whatever other computer is connected, what should happen is it should go to the router, and usually the router does not really pay much attention to the port numbers on your local area network, your LAN. So the router usually doesn't really care so much about ports on your local area network. It's just worried about your IP address, your local IP address. So what it's going to do is it's going to see that, and it's going to say, okay, yep, that IP address is over here, and it's going to send it to the server. And at that point, the server is going to recognize this protocol right here, and it's going to recognize it as port coming in traffic on port 80. And you should get your, your typical it works default page for Apache. If you haven't changed any of it, if it's just a fresh install of Apache, usually you'll have a web page comes up and says it works on it. And like I said, that's just the response. So now if you've got this much going on, if this much is working for you, now again, if you're on your server, you're going to have to know what the IP address is, or local area IP address is for that. And if you're getting this much, if this much is happening and you're getting the web page, it works or whatever on your local area network, you're in good shape. All right, so at that point we know that everything is functioning properly on your local area network. Now if you're not getting this, then you've got to figure out what's going on. Why is this not working? It's very unlikely to be the router at this point. Okay, so what it most likely is to double check and make sure that Apache is actually running. Now if you have a fresh install of Linux, of course most of my new tutorials are going to be based upon a Raspbian, which is a version of Debian, or however you pronounce that, on the Raspberry Pi. So if you have a fresh install, you haven't installed a bunch of other stuff on it, and you've just installed Apache, then this should work. I mean, it just should. Now if Apache isn't running, there's a whole lot of other issues that could be going on there that could possibly cause that. Something else, usually it means something else is using one of these ports, and so Apache will fail to actually launch if these two ports are being used by another program. So you want to make sure that that's not the case if Apache isn't running. Go and look and figure out how to see what services or programs are running on a Linux server, and that's a whole nother thing. But anyways, my whole point here is if this point right here is working, if this connection here is happening, then your server is ready. It's functioning, it's up and running. So now the next step is going to be to get it to connect from there to the internet, to go through the router. Okay, so we got this. We've got our local area network. This is working. We can connect by typing in this IP address. It takes us to our server, shows it works. Now we get to the router. Everything comes through the router. These are all connected, and it channels it all through the modem. The modem is a single lane to your internet, which ultimately it connects to your internet service provider first, and that works like a hub, and then it's all out to the World Wide Web. So you can almost imagine it like being a router in your local area network, it being like multi-lanes. Let's just say we've got a multi-lane road here. We've got one that comes here. And well, in this analogy, we've only got two computers. We've got the server computer and the laptop, so we'll just stick with that. And then it all has to go out of town. So this is what happens in your router. Your router determines which way it needs to go, and it's going to be based upon your local IP address, and then it's going to go out one address, which is going to be your public address. And in this demonstration, I'm going to use I'm just going to make one up, 24.168.1.11. 214.72.143. Okay, this would be our public address, okay? And that is where all this traffic has to come from. When I connect to the internet, outside internet, with my server, it's gonna have this address. When I connect to the outside internet with this computer, my laptop, it's gonna have that address. So they all share this address. That's the address for this pipeline, you might say, or the connection between the modem and the internet service provider. Now, if you remember in my earlier tutorial, whenever I typed in on my laptop, I typed in the address to the server, it went to the server. Okay, so that was http:// that, and it went to there. So the next step to getting your server publicly accessible is going to be do the same thing with this address, right? So you would go http://24.214. etc. Right? Just the rest of this IP address. And now it should, if you get a no response or something like that, page not found, rejected or whatever, that's going to be your router. Okay? Your router is blocking the traffic. It's not routing it to the server. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to look into your router's manual and do port forwarding. And somewhere in your router configuration, there should be a configuration menu where you can log into your router, and there should be some sort of option to do port forwarding. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to forward port 80, because remember this right here, the HTTP, this is port 80. So whenever this request comes in this way, it's going to come in on port 80. And your router is going to say, what do I do? Do with port 80 traffic or requests. Now, it didn't worry about it. The router wasn't worried about it here because it was direct. You have a direct pipeline to that address, that IP address. It doesn't have to worry about it because it just says any request for this address, just send it right through. But whenever we're talking about coming in from outside from our public IP address, it doesn't know where port 80 should go because you have all these computers as potential candidates to receive the traffic on port 80. So you're going to go in your router menu and you're going to tell it, if this is your server address, you're going to tell it to forward it to this IP, local IP. And so then it's going to take any traffic or any request for port 80 and it's going to send it straight to our server. And that's where we want it to go. And then of course it's going to answer it. Apache will answer it and give a response back and issue the web page. You should see that it works. Now if you get port forwarding right, then that's essentially it. But that'll be your next step. Once you can connect through the local area network, the next step is going to be try to connect through your public IP. Now if you don't know what your public IP is, you can go to a website, whatsmyip.com. Alright, and that'll tell you what your public IP address is. And then you'll just type that in from your laptop, and it should take you from your public IP to your server if your router is configured correctly. Okay, so let's say that this works. To understand how this is flowing, your traffic flow, even though that this is on the same local area network as this computer, when you type in your external IP address, your public IP address on this computer, the traffic is going to go something like this. It's going to go down, it's going to hit the router, it's going to go to your internet service provider, because it's your internet service provider is going to explain where this computer is. Now, I don't know how far it gets or whatever, but what will happen is it'll come back, it'll hit your router. Your router is going to see traffic on port 80. It's going to say, where do I send traffic on port 80 coming in? And of course, if you've configured your router correctly, it's going to say, oh yeah, to this IP address here, right? Your server. And then your server is going to see that I've got traffic on port 80. I need to give it an answer. So it's going to respond back, bing, and pretty much the same route backwards. Now, the exact details of this, I can't explain that part. I'm just not tech savvy enough there to understand that. But this is essentially how it works, right? So your public IP address, it's no longer, your router does not know unless it caches this, but again, I'm not getting into all that. It's going to see that it's not in this this subtable here, or subnet, whatever that's called. It's not within this range, so the router doesn't know because it didn't issue this IP address. So it's going to ask your internet service provider, since that's the one that issued it. And then of course it's going to say, oh yeah, that's me, my bad, and reroute the traffic back. So again, if it's working here, if you've got it working there, then you're in good shape. The next step is going to be, say, your domain name. Now your domain name is going to add additional complexity to the whole equation. This basically means that your server is public, but the domain name is something altogether different, because computers understand IP addresses, not domain names. Okay, for a computer to understand a domain name, it's going to have to translate that to an IP address. Alright? So whatever domain name, we need it to reconcile to our public IP address. And it's going to do this by contacting a DNS server. And your internet service provider is going to usually be the one, unless you've manually specified one, and that's a whole nother thing. But it's going to ask the DNS server what the IP address is for a domain. And so anytime you're on your computer, you type in google.com, this is the route it goes. It's going to send it, it's going to go external. Your internet service provider is going to ask the DNS server, where is Google? It's going to give it an IP address, and it's going to connect to the Google server. And so if we have a domain name, it's going to have to come back to our IP address. And here's kind of how that works. Let's say we have our domain name is mydomain.com. This is, now you'll have to purchase a domain from a domain registrar. I'll show you in another tutorial how to do this through GoDaddy. I mean, not GoDaddy. Google domains. I think they're great, and you can actually work with this, but that's a whole nother subject. So what we're going to need our domain, a real domain that we've registered, and it's going to have to point to our public IP address, right? And how that's going to happen is, wherever we have our DNS records at, I don't remember exactly what they're called. I think they are DNS records. Wherever our registrar is. So if it was Google domains, let's pretend this is Google domains. This is going to have a record, a nice little fancy record, and where it has our domain name and our IP address. And it's going to make the connection, because ultimately the DNS server is going to get its information from there, and the two have to match up. And if they do, if our domain matches up, the DNS server asks. So when we type in the mydomains.com, it's going to come out, say, oh yeah, DNS server says, yep, goes to this IP address. It comes back. Our router doesn't see this, right? Our router doesn't care about IP address at that point. It doesn't care about this IP address either, really. All the router's looking for, remember, is traffic on port 80. So it doesn't care. It doesn't care who it comes from or whatever. If there's traffic coming in, a request coming in for port 80, and we've configured it, it's going to send it up here to our Apache server. Now here's where things get fun, I guess, with an Apache server. I guess fun is a good word. We can have multiple domains by this. So we set up a domain on there as a vhost is one way. You just have a record, domain record there that it answers to. And again, look up Apache. I'll try to leave a link or something like that. I'll write it on, kind of give more detail on the website. But so what'll happen is there'll be a record on there, and on our Raspberry Pi we're going to have a folder. It's var www/ht dot, or no, html / alright, so if it's by the default, this will be where it answers, and then Apache is going to have an index file, index.html, and there's usually that default one in this location. So this, even though I broke it over, I ran out of room right here, but it'll be var /www/html/index.html. That's what it serves back. And what you can do is say, I have another domain, my other domain.com. Now these have to be real domains. You can't use these because they're probably already taken. And it's also going to point to that IP address. So whenever somebody visits either one, and again, that information has to be on the Google domains, has to say that my other domain and my domain.com, both of them point to this IP address, and it comes in. Now Apache sees these. It's going to see the domain names. I can have them all point to the same folder, or I can even do var www.html / my other domain / and then I'll have a index.html. It doesn't matter what you name this, because you're gonna put this. I could make this whatever I wanted, okay? So it doesn't, the folder name does not have to match that. That's just good practice. Because again, whenever you configure it in your Apache server, you're going to tell it, whenever it sees this domain, you're going to tell it what directory to point to, and then whatever file. If you don't specify, if you just do myotherdomain.com, it's going to look for index.html. And you can do myotherdomain / server.html. So it's going to go to this, and it's going to look for server.html, which is going to be in the same folder as index.html. So that's kind of how that works. Okay, I think this pretty much sums it up. I mean, I think this explains enough. Now, if you can access your server via this, it's public, okay? You've successfully done that, and you're good to go. If you one day are able to answer or to get reach your server through your domain, and then another day you're not, chances are your IP address, your public IP address, your ISP has changed your address, and this is called a dynamic IP. And what you'll have to do if this is the case, your internet service provider switches your IP address up at random times, you're going to have your server contact your DNS, or actually Google Docs, or domains, Google domains. You're going to have your server contact Google domains and then tell it, hey, my new IP address is whatever your new IP address is, and set it for these domains. So if you you at one point could access your server via your domain, and then now you can't. That's probably what happened. Your ISP has changed the IP address. Now, there's another catch too. If some internet service providers block port 80, I've heard of it, I've never experienced it, but if they block port 80, then you're not going to be able to connect this way. And the reason they do it is because they know people want to run a server on port 80. And so if they have problems with that, then they may very well do it, or they just want to go ahead and stop it up front. They'll block port 80 and you can't access it. And again, if you can connect this way and you are sure that your router is set correctly, that you got that port 80 forwarded to this IP address, so your traffic knows to go there, and you still can't access it via your public IP address, there's a good chance, even if port 80 isn't blocked, you might want to be very careful and check your internet service provider's terms and conditions. And usually in fine print, I've seen it in quite a few of them, they're going to say no servers. No servers on your hosted on your internet service. And because usually they're going to want you to upgrade to like a business account or something like that, and where you pay more for less and all that good stuff. So, use at your own risk. If they find out that you have a server running on your internet service, they may, cancel your internet service, and then you're without internet altogether. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to get so much into dynamic IPs and domains and everything, and that's kind of it in a nutshell. But again, if you understand this much, you understand how the traffic flows through your router, through your local area network. Okay, so if you can figure out, you can get it to work through your local area network, and that all works fine in between your computer, then the only catch is going to be in your router configuration, and then whether or not your internet service provider blocks it. You can always forward your port. You can use a different port too, so you can use, like, say, instead of 80, use 80, 81. I mean, there's all different ports, just pretty much any open port. I don't know what the limitations are, but if you change it to 8081, then you're going to want to change your Apache server to answer to port 8081, and that's in your Apache configuration. Again, that's outside the scope of this tutorial, but yeah, I hope that helps. I hope that helps explain it. If you still have questions, you still don't quite understand it, let me know, and I'll try to update it. But anyways, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.